Hello and welcome back to Pat Psychology Masters. Today I'm going to be talking about the self-concept, and it's going to be the first video of a little two-part series about the psychological study of the self. So, to begin, I'd like to invite you to ask yourself, who are you? Now, the answer to that question is the self-concept, is your self-concept. And it mirrors the best definition I've seen for the self-concept out there. And that is, the self-concept is the individual's idea of who they are. So what is the function of the self-concept? Well, it organises our lived experiences in our mind. It buffers our current experience, so we select for particular stimuli in our environment and we attend to particular things which are most relevant to who we are. And it also predicts our future experiences and predicts what we might become and who we might become. It might tell you, oh well, this is what I'm going to succeed in professionally, or this is an area where I'm not going to go into. The self-concept helps you organise these ideas past, present and future. It helps you organise those ideas about yourself. So that's its function. But what's it made of? Well, it can be largely broken down into a few different constituent parts, which I'll first list out and then I'll explore in a bit more detail as the video progresses. So, starting off, we have symbols, we have schemas, and schemas in the psychological sense are patterns of thoughts and behaviour. So we have symbols, schemas, and we also have memories. They inform our self-concept. And then environmental interactions. They will have a big impact on what our self-concept is. So, beginning with symbols. Well, what symbols are relevant to our self-concept? It mightn't be initially obvious, but linguistic symbols, or, to use more lay terminology, words. We use words to describe ourselves. And these words describe our schemas and they describe what we are. For instance, think of physical attributes. You might be tall, you might be small, you might be skinny, you might be fat, you might be muscly, you might be scrawny, you might be somewhere in between on all of these different spectrums. And those physical attributes form a part of your self-concept. Also, we have linguistic symbols which discuss our social roles. So that might be as a partner to your girlfriend or boyfriend or wife or husband. It might be that you are a sibling to your brothers and sisters. It might be that you're a son to your parents or a daughter to your parents. So these also inform what our self-concept is in the world. Lastly, on the symbol front, and this is particularly relevant to schema, we have group membership. So, for instance, you might have a linguistic label of, well, I'm a student. So you might have a self-concept of yourself as somebody who's constantly learning or who's studying or who's submitting assignments or who's conducting academic work. You might have a group membership as a football player. So you might have ideas of athleticism, of strength, of fitness. That feeds into your self-concept also. What links in really interestingly to this symbolic and schematic representation of the self-concept is Alan McConnell's multiple self-aspect framework. So he has a theory of the self-concept that it's made up of multiple different self-aspects. And he imagines a person as possessing different self-aspects. Let me provide examples. So for instance, in my instance, I'm a boyfriend to my partner, and that boyfriend self-aspect might be particularly compassionate, loving, understanding, forgiving, all those wonderful things, I hope. But let's say I have a little brother. In that instance, my big brother self-aspect might diverge from that a little bit, and it might be a bit more serious, paternal, protective. So these two self-aspects are distinct from one another. There may be some overlap, but generally speaking, Alan McConnell thinks that we have differences of self-concept depending on who we're with. It's kind of a relationship approach to the self-concept, and he feels that different environments kind of prime different self aspects, and that will impact upon what self-concept is evident at any given moment in time. Now that's just an interesting aside. We're going to move on to memory now. So what role does our memory play in our self-concept? Well, let's consider the two aspects of our declarative memory. We have episodic memory, which is that memory which is very personal and relevant to us. And we also have semantic memory, which is kind of like our memory for facts about the world. So an example of semantic memory would be Paris is the capital of France, or the sky is blue. They're not necessarily personally relevant to me. I haven't spent any time in Paris, and I'm not an astronaut. But I still know that these things are true about France and about the sky. So, taking episodic memory first, we can investigate what role it plays in the self-concept by looking at people who have difficulties with their episodic memory. And people who have medial temporal lobe amnesia have very great difficulties with their episodic memory. So, if you include these participants in an experiment where you invite them to finish the statement, I am, and let's pretend I have medial temporal lobe amnesia, and I say I am a psychology student. Now, with medial temporal lobe amnesia, I'll find it hard to provide evidence as to what makes that true. So I might say I am a psychology student, I can identify with that part of my self-concept, but I will struggle to say I am a psychology student because I go to university, because I conduct these studies, because I do this reading, because I'm interested in these things. Medial temporal lobe amnesia it detracts away from that capacity to access that part of your self-concept. Now, semantic dementia is a little bit different. People with semantic dementia are able to evidence their I am statements. They're able to access who they are in the present moment, but they're not able to access who they might become, which I thought was fascinating. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that people with semantic dementia, they can't quite remember facts about the world. Maybe they can't really remember how those facts might apply to them in the future. That's just me spitballing. Now, I haven't talked about how the environment interacts with your memory. So, I'll give a few examples. The attachment style for a person really is going to impact on what their self-concept is. So, if somebody had a secure attachment to their primary caregiver, they will have an opinion or view or concept of themselves that is more understanding, more compassionate, more forgiving, compared to somebody who, let's say, had an insecure attachment to their primary caregiver. And that, I suppose, speaks for itself as to the reasons why that might be the case. Interestingly, and I suppose unsurprisingly, a person's minority status will also have an impact on their self-concept. So, are they a member of a minority group? Do they play kind of unusual sports that maybe nobody else plays? Like, for instance, I'm very interested in rock climbing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they would form a very important part of my self-concept. But here in Ireland, people are much more into their Gaelic football, and if I was into Gaelic football, it probably wouldn't play as important a role in my self-concept as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and rock climbing do now. And for ethnic minorities, it's particularly true that they might identify with their ethnicity because they're surrounded by racial differences. This isn't always the case, but typically it is for the self-concept. Interestingly, the academic environment can have a great impact on a person's self-concept. And this speaks to an idea from one of my previous videos in which I'm talking about Carl Rogers' humanistic view on personality. And he talks about conditions of worth and conditional positive regard. And we see people's view of their self-aspect being very, very conditional for those people who've come from a schooling which had a very meritocratic philosophy. So it makes sense. In a meritocratic school, you're celebrated for your achievements. And if you don't achieve, well, then you're not being celebrated. So you're going to have quite a conditional view of yourself. Whereas in schools with a more ego-protecting philosophy, students are less concerned about necessarily what they achieve, but more so how they feel more holistically. Now this video has just been an introduction to the self-concept. I hope you found it interesting, but I have to say that next week's video is going to be fascinating. I'm going to be talking about self-construal and the different types of self-construal that occur across the world in different cultures. So it has implications for how importantly people of different cultures view the attributes of consistency and authenticity, and I was amazed to find that this isn't homogenous across cultures. In some cultures, authenticity not that important, and consistency also not that important, and this has very interesting and important consequences. Some consequences which are actually very beneficial. So I'm going to be talking about that in next week's video. So subscribe and hit that bell icon to make sure that you don't miss out on next week's video, because I'm very confident you'll find the information fascinating. I found it incredible to read. And as always, hit thumbs up if you liked this video, hit thumbs down if you didn't. Let me know what you think about the self-concept in the comments. Is there something that I've said so far that you disagree with? Have I missed the mark on something, or have I totally omitted something? Let me know and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you here again next week.